Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kaveh Kavusi, and I'll be discussing a diverse array of subjects that span from my experiences in the emergency room to the furthest reaches of the universe. I'll be hosting guests, inviting illuminating conversations that at times may challenge ways of thinking or being, while also nurturing curiosity, meaning, and awe into life. Please consider subscribing, liking, saving, or sharing this podcast with any of your friends or family if it feels right for you. Thank you for taking the time. Let's dive into the podcast. This is a special podcast. It's the first time I've personally seen people in this large of a number on a podcast speaking about something that's actually relevant and not inflammatory, nonsensical like a lot of the garbage that shows up online. This conversation was among a total of 9 men, including myself, speaking on certain subjects that were pulled at random and that we dove into. And there were important subjects that I feel are applicable to many men, regardless of where they're hailing from, in order for them to consider their relationship to life, their relationship to integrity, and how men can be congregating in places to be unconditionally witnessed and be in spaces with men where otherwise there would be competition and comparison. You will see camaraderie and support as you dialogue what the reflections are. Our example is one of many, and I was really grateful for all of these men who came from across North America to make this happen. There were some men that were missing, but they were there in our hearts, and we acknowledged them throughout this conversation. I appreciate you taking the time, and I look forward to hearing your feedback regarding this podcast. Should we share a breath together first?
Sure.
All right. Okay. Count of 3. Take a nice deep breath in. We'll do 3 breaths together, right? All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. And out. And again. And one more. Take all the air in. All right, this next episode of the podcast is a special one. We've got 8 of 10 gents of, 4 billion potential men that could be up at the cottage this weekend. It's minus 40 outside and with wind chill, from what I'm told. That's for the Americans, and it's minus, actually that should be roughly about the same Celsius as well too. We've got a special weekend going on up at a cottage that I initially got for people to come to gather, and this is the first time that we've actually made it happen. And as I'm recording this, if you're not listening with video, I'm looking into the eyes of all the men that are here. And across the room we've got David Cedar, hailing from Humboldt, California. Next we've got Larry Doremus. He's from New Jersey. Ryan Burkholder, who's trying to find himself in between provinces right now. Kyle Dow, originally from Sudbury, now in Squamish, British Columbia. Joe, who is from Barrie, I guess. I don't know if you're actually from here. Myself, who's from Ontario in Canada. Chris Hager from California. And Eric Morris from New Jersey. Am I right? Jersey. So we got a really beautiful, diverse group of men who are here together who met in 2019 in a 1-year fellowship that was called, or mastermind, whatever you want to call it, called Fit for Service, that was organized by initially Aubrey Marcus, and we all came together throughout the year doing certain activities, events, and it would culminate with these gatherings that were called summits that a lot of people know and go to, but they were really special for us. And it's been 3 years now since the original cohort, and this is the first time, at least for myself since then, that we've been able to gather people from across the land for a few days to actually come and connect. And we've been having some very beautiful conversations thus far, and I'm really appreciative for everyone to have made the time to come up from all of their respective places, leaving their families, their communities, for us to come and connect and recharge. You also got Ryan Mullins, who's here too, who's from Calgary, start to finish, right? Yeah. All right. Uh, we don't really have a format to this other than we've been having conversations surrounding a book by Adyashanti called The Most Important Thing. That was one of the catalysts that we had as a dialogue initially when we were planning to come up here. But of course, when you come together, that is just one catalyst that opens up a plethora of other conversations. And today we have a different format, one that I haven't seen done, where Larry's brought a game, or it's a card set called Icebreaker Deeper Talk by the Best Self Company that we were going to be using as prompts. And you're going to hear from everyone in different there's going to be cards that are pulled, and the one that resonates with a particular man will lead to first his share and then whatever dialogues that are subsequent to that. All of these are invitations. They're not necessities for anyone to change their life. No part of you needs to change. All of us can always benefit from reconsideration from time to time. I hold a lot of these men's insights, all of them actually, in high regard in different ways. I deeply appreciate their presence, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity for us to be connecting. And regardless of what you hear, the spectrum of beautiful to at sometimes dark, we embrace them as just potential parts of the human experience and the spectrum that they can exist upon. So if anything does come up that can be difficult for you, please do consider getting support. Reach out to us directly if there's anyone that in particular said something that really stuck out to you. And with that, we'll get the first card pulled. Does anyone like to share anything? And I also want to thank you guys all for taking the time and being a part of this experiment.
I'll say thank you for not only having us up here and also clarifying that you do respect all of our opinions, not just some of ours. That was that sat with me for half a second. I was like, wait a minute.
Me too.
Which one of these mother? Am I on this list? My insecurities kicked right up for half a second there. No, but honestly, thank you for having us up here. It's beautiful. It's great to be surrounded by, amazing men who are conscious, who are putting in the work, who are doing these things to be in this environment where you're so seen and it feels really safe to share and get into some of the more vulnerable spots of ourselves in a container where it just feels not only safe, but right and encouraged. And that's not something we all get to experience daily, or some of us not even, fortunate to have that in our lives at all. So I count myself blessed to have that. And I know all of us do as well.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Anybody else would like to hop onto the mic at any point? Like, pass it over. All right. Yeah. Anyone want to have any opening shares, right? You in between?
I appreciate it. I'm sitting here teaching an anger management course in the other room, and I feel a little split. But I really appreciate just being able to come in and participate a little bit. But in the spirit of just complete transparency and leading through example, is this going to be disruptive if I hop in for 15 minutes every 45 or so? Okay.
Oh man, yeah, there's 8 other egos to contribute.
There you go. Well, hey, you guys might be able to talk because I won't be in the room filling all the space all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And maybe there's some subjects that you guys are discussing there that you feel would be transferable about continuity of a community for men who are carrying charge. Anger that's silenced, like you were saying, ends up expressing itself as rage. And there's elements of when men here come and share some of the tougher stuff, there's an aspect of them that softens, and then that rage doesn't need to be, and the anger has a navigatability that's has a different quality to it.
Well, and it's really interesting, as I just in the room with the men talking there, already talking about the repression of anger, is a big question. It's like, people say I'm an angry guy, but I don't express anger, but I repress anger. And then, and people are sensing that, and like, what becomes, of that? So it's interesting, the synchronicity of me being in that room and you're already having discussions that are very poignant to what's happening there. And further to that is someone said, at least, like, I'm in this course, but what happens after? How do you help me after? And I'm just, that almost, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit about, the way society is and just how alone people feel. And, people want to make change and don't know how to and want support. And, how lucky are we to sit in a room with, 9 other men and have that support. But so many people, and someone just said it a second ago, is like, don't have that. Yeah. Oh, hey. Chris? Oh, okay.
I don't care what you call me.
And yeah, so I just really find it interesting, that synchronicity of that. So with that, I'll just turn it back.
Yeah, thank you, man. These are the realities. Getting 8 people to be in sync with something is already a feat, but real life is happening simultaneously, and we're just embracing that. So I think we'll kick it off with Mr. Morris reading the first card, and then whoever feels called, maybe just throw a hand up and we'll pass the mic. Does that work for everyone? Yeah?
And
Dave?
for the first card of the afternoon, what widely accepted beliefs need to be dead and buried? Something's coming to mind for me, and I think it's around masculinity and vulnerability. That the masculine can't be vulnerable; it has to repress its feelings, right? I think that one is really like the traditional viewpoints of masculinity, right? I think that's something that needs to be dead and buried. I think that there needs to be this new evolving masculine that is balanced and is vulnerable and expressive and able to share love and spread love. I feel into that one.
And able to look cozy in that nice red blanket of yours.
Exactly.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, you can think of a lot of men who are brought up and very early on, they see lack of expression that's emotional, and they are asked when they have emotions to silence them, and some of them are too big, not welcomed. Put your strong face on and get back to it. And a boy who is seeing that emulated in someone who they look up to, other boys who also themselves haven't had the permission given to them, collectively all grow up. Then they become these men that are supposed to have now vetted into acting, doing, behaving in ways that are not allowing the feelings and the emotions to have an availability to it, having strong output, being of service, and then their partner meets them and their child meets them, and they're supposed to have a sensitivity all of a sudden. 20 years of, or plus years, or maybe whatever it is, of repressing one of the most important qualities of our humanity that makes us feel anything is demanded by a partner, and she grieves as we probably grieve as well too, as men around the world do. And where we didn't have permission to feel, we'll unfortunately reach for people, places, things, molecules, acts that makes us feel either the coping equivalent or some semblance of what feeling is that we have any remote permission to. And so like experiences like this soften us back a little more, where we can feel just a little bit more. I can feel some layers around the shell of my heart peeling back throughout like the moments that I have where I meet eyes that are witnessing me and where I'm feeling vulnerable. And I can only imagine how many men have had zero permissions for this, and they get punished for the potential consideration of even doing that, meeting the eyes of another man. Because if you haven't, it's all competition until that point.
And I really wanted to add to that before I head back to the class, but that is incredibly poignant, because the biggest injury, in teaching these courses for 13 years is consistently, like, when I look at my classes, the makeup is 90% men. Right now I have 2 women and probably about 12 men in there, and it's exactly that. there's no permission to express pain, any emotion other than anger, right? Or kind of happiness. But there's no room for sad. There's no room for injury, and what I see consistently in these classes is not only the injury that happens to that individual because they can't express it out, but then the destruction that happens when it has to come out. But it comes out as that rage we were mentioning there because it's repressed. And it's like, it's not repressed anger that turns to rage. It's repressed pain, repressed sadness, repressed fear. And when we think of that most important thing, what comes to mind is our ability to just feel what is present for us without our own internal judge, which that judge is really just an echo of society's judge, in a lot of cases, or maybe mom and dad's. So I just wanted, to just kind of add that thought, that it's probably one of the biggest things I think that is causing a lot of challenge in our society today.
Yeah, I think something that comes up for me is I'd be curious to what the group has to say on this, but I remember the day my perspective on what a man looks like changes, right? And it happens for all of us at different times, but for me, it really happened at one of our first summits when Kyle Kingsbury, who we would all agree is, kind of the archetype epitome of like what a man would look like in terms of like this fighter, this warrior, right? It's been in the UFC, played football, all these other things. And when I would witness him going up and talking about his kids, and just the mention of their name would bring a tear, right? And at that time, I think he only had Bear, but just talking about how, the importance of him being a dad and what he wanted to replicate that his father did and make sure that he never replicated that his father did in stepping into his own fatherhood and being a parent, and watching that emotion come from him unapologetic, right? It wasn't, I'm sorry for these tears. It was like, here you go. Here's this gift of these tears, is really the way I took it. And immediately I was shocked to see that level of vulnerability and honesty. And at the same time, drawn to it like, holy crap, well, if this guy can do it and, be that out there, then I need to reshape how I'm perceiving how men are supposed to be able to act or share in their vulnerability or have this discussion. And it was this weird permission that he gave me just by being him and existing in that feeling. And I think that, a lot of us here probably got a similar feel for that as well, and have given each other the container of safety that inevitably bleeds over into our everyday lives, where now, I think the last time I really remember having a good cry was probably 14 or 15. And then when my kids were born, tears came up and I was trying to suck them up, no, not yet. Right? And so to have that permission and to see the real strength in what happens when men are vulnerable with their emotions, and how much that really is the key to other men unlocking, their own strength by being emotional.
And now you cry 3 times a day and are probably Kleenex's biggest customer.
Yeah, of course. I'm due for my second one anytime. It's, coincides with my morning bowel movement. I gotta have a good one. Gotta have a good release here and there. No judgment.
Do you remember what it felt like the first time you cried again?
Yeah, it felt overwhelming, because at that point it was, there was times where the tears would come and I would, watching a movie or something kind of salient that would tug on my heartstrings. And I remember thinking not crying, my wife is here, don't, again, I had that story of, this is a sign of weakness, or you're not strong if you do this. And so when it happened with my kids, which I know is, in some ways cliche, and yet that was a part of the experience, to have this overwhelming abundance of love and emotion that I had locked away for so long, I didn't know what to do. It was out of the box, and it was so much, and it was so big that I felt that same, like I just needed to like drop down in a heap and experience it. And yet I was denying myself really going deep into that emotion, really like sitting with it and letting it come out. And it was a result of all those years where I felt like I had to repress it. And so, again, flash forward to that workshop we did with Kyle. I think I went back to my room and literally just sat down in the room, and we might have been in Tahoe even. And I just like cried for like 20 minutes. And even then I came out and like, hey, where were you? I was like, taking a nap, definitely not crying. Like I still wasn't ready to like, come out to the world that I had these emotions. And yet part of it is coming out to yourself and identifying it.
You were witness to my actual first cry in probably about 6 years. Yeah. I had repressed kind of all of my feelings, and it was in Anahata's breath work that I was kind of given permission to go into some of the trauma bodies and to release them. And my release was through tears, and I felt like a child, where I'd almost get I would have trouble breathing because I was crying so hard, and it felt very cathartic. Yeah. Cathartic to just release this. I mean, I'm talking like I went through really traumatic experiences and just kept to this North Jersey, like have to be the strong one, right? Like one of my best friends killed himself and literally showed up for everybody and refused to like show that like deeper state of emotion just because I didn't feel comfortable doing it. And then through breath work, I was given the permission to release. And it was, now I'm kind of up there with you on a 2-a-day cry. And it's really easy to connect to those emotions. And it just, what a good feeling it is to have that ability and that capability to just like release when you need to release. Right. And like, think about what that's preventing, right? When we're holding that in, like we're literally making ourselves sick. We're literally like making pain within our body.
Yeah. What does that look like in the world when men, like 4.2 billion men, a lot of the world is run by a lot of men? What happens in repression?
Well, what happens in repression is the state of the world that we exist within now, where 60% of people in North America have mental ailments, right? Because we're disconnected from things. And if we're disconnected from the emotions we feel, then we're disconnected from the emotions that everybody feel, right? So there's no compassion that could be developed there because we're taught to sever that connection and just sink back into our own experience rather than having the consideration for the collective experience. And so I might segue this to a different answer that I have to the same card, which is, so if the question's what widespread belief needs to die, was that right? I would say it's this belief that the only component of our human experience is based in material and form, right? So the physicalist perspective of reality, when what we're discovering is there's much more to the human experience, right? So the unseen world of energy, essentially, kind of tying into the more animistic philosophy that is represented by some different indigenous cultures, right? So to know that a tree has a spirit and an energy, and why this is important, because it opens us up to the felt experience, right? So we could go out into nature and feel what it's like to be in nature. And if we could feel what it's like to be in nature, then we could feel what it's like internally. And the whole thing is connected, right? It's all about connection, widespread connection to self, others, and nature. And if we get there, how does that change the human experience, both individually and collectively? And I think it brings us to a much more harmonious place where we could find flourishing and fulfillment.
Mm-hmm. When you say that, I picture this guy in the financial district in somewhere in the world, who's on the 43rd floor, and he's hearing this, and none of it's registering to him, like losing masculinity, like reframing what masculinity is, energy, change the differences. Why do I need to change? What language has that person who's the least likely to listen to this in the first place have a reconsideration of all of the things and have an openness where they have a rigidity to life that long ago was almost dictated based on how their conditioning was.
How do we get a message across to him?
How do we open up the individual who is, probably the most closed off right now from reconsideration?
Well, it's probably speaking to the pain point. So it's like, where is he not happy in life, and why is he not happy, right? And so it's a reorientation to what actually creates happiness and fulfillment. And again, I think it is connection. And if somebody's so programmed and rigid in their life experience as they know it, then they actually have to step out of that environment. And we see the rise in plant medicine right now, and that's something that can pretty quickly change somebody's worldview, right? So it is a belief system and a rigid worldview that keeps people trapped in their own suffering, right? So I don't have precise language at this moment, but I would say, like, what are you struggling with? And does it need to be such a struggle? Can we change it?
Just to expand on that, so I actually share your belief and completely agree with you, and we've talked about this a lot before, but what my answer would be to this card, and what I'm seeing more and more of all the time, is like, what I'd like to see is like our approach to exercise and like our relationship we have with our bodies. And it's like, how do we apply the philosophy that you're talking about, like having more of an intention of feeling rather than like the material. So it's not about like building a 6-pack abs, or like it's not about, bodybuilding. That's one version of exercise, but it's a very small version of many others, right? And so like, can we have reverence for the gift that our body is? Can we take time to feel what's present in the body, whether it's through breath work, whether it's through some movement, whether it's through some strength training, whether it's through some yoga. But it's like, what's helped me most is kind of changing my relationship to exercise, changing my relationship to my body, and seeing it differently, where it's like, that's the thing I'd like to see culture shift a little bit too, where it's like, fitness isn't just what we see on the advertisements for Lululemon and Nike. Like, that's just a small section. Like
the whole 0 day off culture and all
that. Exactly. Like, what true fitness is like your commitment to your vehicle that you're going through this life in. You know what I mean? And taking care of that vehicle and improving the ride that you're on through the vehicle that you're in, right? And so
how do you incentivize body feeling while people are doing this thing called bodybuilding? And when we're talking about fitness, adding the component of the felt, how do you envision that?
I think, in a word, it's mindfulness. So just being mindful of what the body is telling you, the language that it speaks, and also how you can communicate back with it. Like, the body doesn't speak English, right? It speaks in a different language. And so can we start to learn that language and start to speak and have more of a dialogue with it? And so it's like, exercise isn't just about like, all right, come on, you fucking pussy, like, let's fucking go. It's not a workhorse. Our body's not a workhorse that we can just drive into the ground. I mean, it is if we treat it that way, but what's our experience going to be like if we do? Can we treat it like, we would the dog that we love, where we're like training behaviors that we want and caring for it and feeding it and getting it the structure that it needs and all that sort of stuff. And so just seeing it in a more loving, caring way, going back to what you're talking about, this is how I view it through the body, just through my work and my experience in athletics and all of that, where it's like, that's one way in to what you're talking about. That I think a lot of us, myself, I'll speak for, is like, I got that wrong for a long time, where it was more about the appearance, the aesthetics, the performance. And then eventually my body stopped appreciating exercise. Exercise wasn't the problem. It was my approach to the exercise, so that's what I would like to see change or shift in North American culture specifically, is that our approach to fitness is very, very narrow and limited.
And you touched on mindfulness, which is, a common theme that we've been talking about a lot. And especially you mentioned, Western culture, North America, and I feel like a lot of the way we transact our lives is very transactional, and we've lost the mindfulness in the micro moments in our life, and we look at people in this weird, like, if somebody's, you're going to get a cup of coffee, do you really see that person, and try to understand like what their story is and be open to receiving that person and just hearing them, if they have something to tell you, just listening with true intention. And I feel like a lot of that is also missing in our culture, so we've lost connection to our body, we've lost connection to nature, and we've lost connection to each other. And, we've taught ourselves it's okay to just not see all these people who you think are unimportant in your life, but everyone's important. Every moment's important, because, you see how chaotic the world is getting now. It's like, who knows if these are our last moments? So if we can just kind of harness that energy and find a way to really be in every moment in life, I think like all of these modalities can solve some of our problems, and they sound easy on the surface, but they take work. Each and every one of these take work and intention.
Oh, yesterday when we were talking, we were sitting here, we were speaking about deconstructive clarification, right? So we were removing the things that were in the way of, if we were looking for something in particular, at least recognizing what shouldn't be there, brought greater clarity on what should. And it sounds like a reprioritization of what life can be and arguably should be, because a lot of it, we were told what life needs to be, that we're all upholding, and we all have a relative world consensus agreement. And a lot of it lacks the things that appears to be the most nutritional aspects of what the life experience is, which I feel like you're highlighting. So that reprioritization is a really big one.
Let's move on to another card.
Yes, sir.
That was only 22 minutes on that one. That's
Yeah,
pretty
we'll
good.
try to keep it. We'll try to keep it to 15 minutes. How does that sound? So we can kind of get through a couple different topics, because some of these cards might get a little heavy.
Yeah.
So let's go with.
Here, let's give it to Dave to read. I'll pass it across for Dave to read.
Yeah,
He's moderator.
he's
All right. Okay.
Next guy.
Is that a pass?
Who or what was the one that got away?
That's a touchy one, huh?
All of you married men will not answer that question.
Everyone's partner leans in a little more. They're like,
Feel the ripples of that one throughout the cosmos.
Yeah.
Somewhere in my life is like,
Elodie, I'm so sorry, but
Yeah, I'll talk to that one.
How
actually.
to quiet 8 men very quickly.
Yeah. This is one that I'd be curious. I'm excited to hear about your guys' experience. But it was a recurring theme. Is a recurring theme for me in my life. And I think every year I come back to this experience. And my perspective has grown with time. And that was my experience of my first like true intimate love at university. We were together for about 4.5 years. I felt like I grew out of the relationship because I needed a lot more. But after it ended, I experienced this grieving and this like desire of wanting that relationship back. Even though in retrospect, I know it couldn't have ever worked because I had so much to do and experiences to have in life that my soul was calling me forward on a very, very different path. But what I discovered is the one that got away is the one that taught me some really, really important lessons around love and family. And so what was a painful experience in the beginning became more of a reflective practice of gratitude. Because I came from a family that didn't have a lot of affection physically and emotionally, not a lot of presence. And so what this person was and what they represented to me was the first like really clear model of that. And so what I was desiring or what I felt like got away was this connection to love and acceptance. And then I had to rediscover that on my own throughout life. But it was a real blessing to have experienced it. So, yeah.
That's beautiful, man. My heart is beating fast, so I know it means I have to say this. It's my dog, man. Like, and he didn't get away. I had to release him because he was only 2 years old, and it was very recent. He's such an active, herding breed that even 2 to 3 hours a day was not enough for him. And I felt so much guilt that he wasn't able to live his best life. And I knew that by bringing a child into the world, it was going to get even worse. It was causing tension between my partner and I. And it was like, I love that dude so much. But what was so, it literally feels like he was a gift to like open me up. And I was his gift. And then it was like we could release each other to go do what we have to do. And when I say he's in a better place now, like I'm not lying, we navigated it slowly and stably, and the world presented people and other dogs where he found a new home, where he's got like 4 other dog siblings and it's doing all the things all the time. So it's like, it's heartbreaking, but paradoxically so beautiful. But yeah, that was the what or the who that got away from me.
And I'm glad that you clarified, like that you gave him to another home rather than put him down.
Yeah. No, I would never. I would have struggled through my life before I would have let him die, but it seemed the higher consciousness move for everyone was to release him in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than struggle through it and have multiple people struggling with that.
Yeah. Good.
Moving on to the next
Is
card.
that the first
Well,
tiers?
I have one real quickly that I think is relevant to add to it. I didn't want to segue out in acknowledging that it kind of ties in that as a man who I feel sacrificed a lot of my 20s for school and that journey, the pursuit of a thing. The who is me from my 20s. And I would have loved to have spent more time with that guy. I would have loved to be present with him, have him go to sleep a little earlier. And I know why, in addition to the school, why he went away. Like when I was 20, I don't know if all you guys know, but I had a tumor in my neck. And I was so terrified of being with the feeling and the surrounding the possibility of me dying. And it was around the time that Adam Yacht from the Beastie Boys had died from the same tumor that he refused to get treatment for. So there was a person that I really looked up to. I loved their music, and then he dies, and I'm going through the same thing as him. So I was for all the treatments, and I checked out from the feeling because every time I did, I was feeling the sense of impending death within my body, the possibility of that. And I took on a story that the world didn't want me because of that. So when people would ask me what the future looked like, I didn't have an answer for my 30s because I didn't think I was going to be there. Children off the table, partner in the future that I marry off the table, because that dialogue of who had a deadline at that time according to that story. And I took on the path of, because I didn't feel like I was well supported in that role of the biggest fear I had of losing life with the tumor in my neck, that I wanted to go into medicine to be the doctor that was able to provide that reassurance and do the things that brought people that peace and see them in that moment. And yeah, it took me almost till age 31 to reconnect back to that guy again. And it was the use of medicines that have you shift your perspective. It was that important, that necessary. But during that time when I would reach into those medicines, those are the only glimpses that I had about reconnecting to the appreciation of the individuals that I had. Otherwise, I was just scanning the world to find a way to survive or to not feel that disgust and pain. And I'd look back in my 30s and say, fuck, I missed all of my 20s. One, because of the endeavor of what med school demands, but the other one was because of my fear of the experience that I had, that I didn't have the permission to feel through and I felt relatively unsupported with the tumor experience. and that's the who. And if to answer the what was probably even before that, from when I was a kid, a lot of the moments had been robbed because I couldn't have the intertwining feelings available as well too. I was asked to be a boy that grew up into an adolescent young male, then to a teenager, and then I was a man apparently when I was 14. People calling me doctor already. I didn't want to be that. But when a condition is instilled, the moments are often robbed, the ability to be immersed. And a lot of parents, though well-intended, rob that from the children because of the demand of what they're expected to be at when they're 18 plus. But 4-year-old little boy or little girl is then asked to be anything other than who they want to be in that moment. And so the what that was lost was the moments, many of them. And this is not, I understand we're in a place of incredible privilege also where we're at. And there's some people that this can be until their last breath, but the what is many moments that I think by doing work like this, we recapture the capacity for maybe embracing and reconnecting to some moments that weren't available before, but also setting a precedent for the capacity for them now and moving forward.
Now I feel like we need to take you on like a week trip where we go everywhere from like age 5 to like 25, you know? So we'll start at the zoo.
Yeah.
And then we'll go next day, we'll go on some roller coasters, and somehow we'll like wind up at a frat party. So you can have your whole like spectrum of experience in 1 week.
Yeah.
Chad will show up. Eric's alter ego Chad will be there.
Pop collar and all.
Chad keeps waving this white bag. Just 6-year-old me.
Isn't that just Billy Madison, essentially? Kaveh needs the Billy Madison.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Appreciate that, guys. If anyone doesn't have anything more to add there.
You might drop it.
See what's next. What beliefs have you adopted from other people that don't serve you now?
Almost all of them.
I mean, I'll kick off this one, and it sort of related to the first topic, the first card that we were talked about, but just growing up in a very Irish Catholic home where I was raised by a single mother, and I was taught early on as a very empathetic child. I didn't really understand all the emotions that I would have constantly because I was able to feel other people's emotions and feel into them, and that's obviously a lot for a kid. And so when you're 6 and 7 years old and, you know, you get around your godfather, he's like, what are you crying for all the time? Stop crying, like, man up. And you start to hear some of those stories that we were talking about earlier. It became very clear that I was really allowed 2 emotions. And Ryan Mullins talked about this. I could either be happy or I could be angry. I couldn't be too angry, and you could be like, those were the 2. So I felt limited in the spectrum of what I had access to because that was explained to me, right? Boys don't cry. We don't do this. We don't do that. You're like, you can't grieve. You can't go into sorrow or disgust or anger. Like, you're afraid of spiders? Too bad. You're the man. Go fucking kill that thing or rehome it, right? Like, these are the things that you have to do as a man. And I realized that I really locked my heart away for a long time. And that's why I didn't access those feelings or why I didn't go into them. And part of me knew, especially as in my late 20s, early 30s, that this is not serving me. And yet I felt like a rat in a maze. Like, I don't see the bigger picture. I don't know how to get to this wheel of emotional cheese where I can experience all of these things and have that on the spectrum. And it was, again, that tie back to when I saw it displayed and getting that permission. And then all of a sudden that story of seeing all the times, because my mom would do the same thing. Like, she was fantastic and she raised me, you know, pretty much by herself. and as a father now, I see the weight of that when my wife goes out of town for a week. And, at the end of that week, I'm like, I'm exhausted. And that was like my mom for, 18 years, right? So I can imagine the level of exhaustion, and I see what she was trying to do, which was not share her emotions or her pain so that she thought it wouldn't carry over to me. And yet as a child, I could hear her in her room with the door locked crying and talking to other people. And that was really confusing as a kid, to not understand exactly what those tears were about, to not be able to comprehend how to help her. And so I stepped into this role that was more like a spouse or a partner, where like my reaction was, well, I got to be really funny for my mom because I need to bring her out of this. Or I'm going to vacuum the whole house because she loves it when I do that. I'm going to do the dishes, and I'm going to try to do all these other things to make my mom happy. And yet those are, making her life maybe easier, but it wasn't treating her pain. And when you see somebody in pain and you don't understand what that access point was to it, like what is the cause or what is the trigger, I think a lot of times as kids, we take that on and we go, well, it's something I did, right? So as a child, there was this confusion of, oh, I'm not being perfect, or I did something wrong. Which still, to this day, I feel back into that child, and it feels heavy to think about those things. And I have this strange sense of gratitude now to have gone through that, because I think all of us here would, whether we embrace it fully or not, we're all healers. And we give other permission to heal themselves to go through that. And I think the majority of people who step into that in any kind of capacity have gone through some of the most fucked up shit that you can go through. And it's so you can relate to people when they come into your life, not from a place of, oh, I'm perfect and I've always been happy. More, I process these things. Here's how I've worked through them. I don't know if this is your roadmap, and yet you can get through it. And yet there is hope. Because there's this feeling of isolation that we all shared even last night, where you said, like, I feel like I'm the only one going through this with, when it's something about, a spouse or a friend or this or that, we can feel alone. And yet just this conversation is opening to some people. Just this conversation is triggering other people's triggers to look deeper within themselves. And so to be able to have a discussion like this and continue to process things from 39 years ago and have that well up is continuing to move through those things. And I feel like we can help ourselves. We could sit with that 5-6-year-old version of Chris and give him some love and give him some empathy and explain those stories a little bit to remove some of that pain and some of that trauma. And a lot of that's just done through the ability to talk to somebody, anybody.
All right, now we're back. We've got one more that's joining us, Sevi, from initially Chicago, but now he hails from California. We're going to be picking up where we left off, where Eric was moderating, pulling up cards. We had a little technological blip that we've coasted through. The rest of it should be smooth. We're going to have one more joining us, Ryan Mullins, full-time in about half an hour. How are you gents all feeling right now?
Alive, maybe.
Yeah? All right, so we're going to drop back in. And something I think that's really powerful is thinking of purpose outside of ourselves. We're having a beautiful dialogue. There's some men, I have a presumption, that may be listening to this for the first time, and when they're hearing 8 or 9 men together where some conversations float on certain subjects that are the threads of connection that's available for them, could be sports, work, life in general. I like a lot of the deep subjects that we've been, and concepts that we've been discussing. So have some of those men in mind who are being invited in for the first time as a consideration, because this could be a possibility in their homes that they could be organizing as well too. It doesn't have to just be conversations that they listen into and drop in from a distance, but it could also be ones that they host or go organize together. And sometimes that can be really difficult, but the benefits can be ultimately so amazing when men do come together in person.
Wow, that was a very manly sword sound right there.
All right,
Think
so
of that context or else.
that was perfect timing, actually. So it's good.
Yeah.
Good. All right, so Eric's gonna read the next one.
We're going to drop in really with a simple question, and it's very surface level. So I just want you all to think about this next one. It doesn't touch real deep. What do you think the meaning of life is?
The meaning of life. I think it's something completely subjective, and so it's a koan, right? It's a question that has no true answer. But what is really important is that each person does find something that is meaningful to them, right? So the book that comes to mind is Man's Search for Meaning. And in there is the Nietzsche quote, or however you like to say his name, that he who has a why can endure anyhow, right? So in this great mystery of life, like nobody actually has a clue what is going on. We're trying to approximate the truth and reality, but we can't actually do it because we're not privy to the full information of our experience or the universe. So we're just making it up as we go. So what are the things that are meaningful to us that allow us to persevere through the hardships of being human? Because if you don't have that thing and it's just like senseless suffering, then what's the point? But if there is something that's truly meaningful, I think a really good example is like connection through family relationships or something greater than ourselves that allows us to show up in those challenging times.
For an unanswerable question, that was pretty fucking good, man.
Who else would like to drop in on that?
Yeah, I'll hop in on that.
You can either use that mic or this one.
Yeah, we'll use that one. Let's lie on top of you, Eric. Yeah, I think to bounce off of what Kyle said, I definitely view life as this empty, meaningless experience until we make the meaning out of it. And so I think the guiding star is to really understand what is of importance, right? As we were discussing yesterday, what's the most important thing? And there is no one important thing. It's very, very subjective. And I think that that's one of the greatest paths to walk in life, is the understanding what meaning that you're going to make out of it, essentially. And that's, for each person, it's so different, it's so unique, and that sculpts the beauty of the collective human experience, is that each person, their meaning is so different. And so that way we have all these different perspectives, and it's like, wow, well, that's really interesting, your take on this specific thing. I never thought about it that way. And it's like, oh, well, it's because I find this meaningful, or I've created meaning out of this. So it's, yeah, just kind of a little piggyback off of what you said, Kyle. And I think that really gives a lot of freedom and sovereignty, where it's like, oh, I get to make this up. I get to make up whatever I want out of this human experience. And like, I don't have to be, subjected to someone else's, influence, or someone else telling me like, oh, this is how you should do things. I mean, how many people end up walking a path that is based upon what their parents tells them or society tells them, and they get midway through and they're like, what the fuck is the meaning? I've never even considered it for myself because I've made meaning out of what someone else told me I should. And I think that like there's a really beautiful opportunity for us to invite in, for whether it's other men listening or individuals, is like, craft your own meaning. Like really, like what, like when you close your eyes and you feel in to the things that really inspire you or touch you, it's like, are you doing enough of that? Are you cultivating and walking a path of those things that are meaning making to you? And that's a really beautiful thing to ponder. So, yeah.
Way to drop in and start with that as you join us for the second half of this podcast.
Good to be here.
Yeah,
dude, because something that why don't you go ahead? Just quick, like tying those two in, meaningful life rather than defining what meaning is as if it's hiding behind a tree or under a rock that we were to discover. The way that we share what meaning is, you said really well that we need to deconstruct very often, or at least reassess what we were defined or invited into thinking that life is in the first place. So we can rediscover and have meaningful moments that we were connected deeply to, and that it was threads that we also wanted to be connected to. And that reclamation has the individual who's knocking in their last breaths, in their last moments, considering, was the experience of my life meaningful? And really feeling into that as an appreciation for the opportunity that was finite that we all get to have.
And like, again, just one of the common threads is like brotherhood is all very meaningful to us, right? Or else we wouldn't have said yes to this experience, because like this is probably one of the most meaningful moments that we'll have throughout the course of the year, ultimately. You know, because it has such it's so special, it's so unique, it's so novel, because it took a lot of energy, and like you're not going to really put in energy into something that isn't meaningful to you, you know. So
Is anybody here out of obligation?
Oh, you pressured me pretty hard.
Is anybody here to get away from something at home? No, so we're here out of choice and out of nurturance, because there's a quality of something that means deeper, and it's usually the meaning is beyond the words. Right?
Yeah, and just to expand on what everybody said so far is like the question. It's a huge, massive question. What's the meaning of life? But like for me, I zone in on the one word of life, right? And so like to be alive and to be here for the experience of being alive. And like as humans, we have the skill of not being here, and we can choose that, or we can choose to be here. So like the brotherhood, the connection, the presence, all these things are tools for us to be alive and to be present for the aliveness that life is. And so, yeah, like the book, we talked about this on our podcast together, and the why for me was always misinterpreted for like achievement. Like I had to make it count, had to make it mean something by like doing, right? But then later I've come to understand and been looking at it in a different way, where the why is more of a way of being. And that's present. That's, you know, all of those things, so that I'm here for the life that exists. And that for me is like the true meaning, is to be as alive as possible so that life has the meaning.
Opting in instead of opting out.
Exactly.
Right, which means showing up for all of it. And I think we tend to be selective in our experience. It's like, oh, I want this part of the experience of being human, but I don't want this part. So I'm going to like pursue the hedonistic aspects of life, which is like feeling good, right, pleasure seeking, rather than recognizing that the hardships are part of it too. So fully showing up for all of it.
I just wanted to drop something that it would be quick, but it relates to everything you guys are saying, especially the being. It's sort of like a Zen story of like this disciple goes to the master, and the master's like, "Hey, look out there and tell me what you see." He's like, "I see mountains and I see rivers," right? And then the master's like, "Okay, go away. Not that the answer is not good enough. Come back." So comes back a couple years later. He's like, "What do you see?" He's like, "I see myself in everything." He's like, "Okay, but come back." So a few years later, comes back and he's like, "What do you see?" "I see mountains and I see river," right? And so it's almost that like the being factor. It's like we're searching for something when it's actually just there. So the meaning is the being in and of itself.
Yeah, and we all get to experience, like when we're saying meaning of life, there's life and non-life, arguably. So during that life, the spectrum of embracing all the human experiences that are available to us, being the orgasm, and all the way to the spectrum of being the most disgusting, heinous thing, are all of the aspects of humanity that encompasses the experience of life that's available to us. And meaning of life is, I really think it's difficult for us to define early on, but you take a really good inventory and checkpoints that you can actually reflect on it. And it seems to be like, if an individual, my meaning of life is very different than what you probably see my meaning of life to be, because of the idiosyncratic reflections that we have of ourselves meeting with life experience and condition as well too. And it's I, well, all I can think about right now is, honestly, Joe is imminently going to be having a child come to this world through him and his partner. And this thought of meaning of life is this grace of the continuity of it that comes through us, that we find value arguably in the substance of what our life experience is, if we were to define it or summarize it. And then life comes through us, and this inflection point happens for people who have had children, that they find purpose outside of themselves, and that redefines and recalibrates meaning to such a greater depth, because there's life that is a part of you that came through you and now is in continuity, you being that guide. And that's almost like polluting my mind, because during this weekend we've been talking so much about the impact that we have as men when we're relatively conscious and unconscious, and then what impact that can have on reclaiming our own stories, especially things that happened during our childhood, and how that can be incredibly empowering for future guidance towards children, who I feel parenting is the most important role on earth, because you're defining what conditions, which are an inevitability, for that child to either experience an embrace of their life as being meaningful, or the way that they become so conditioned that life can feel meaningless. And that child is going to have the permission to see that, or not have access to that, at least temporarily, based on what type of invitation the parents and the world that they're existing in brings forward.
Just to add to that too, and like to go back to what we're talking about as well, like to relate it back to Viktor Frankl and his philosophies, and how he was a Holocaust survivor, right? And then what that quote actually, it made a lot more sense to me, or like it became even more meaningful for me when I heard Esther Perel talk about her experience of her parents surviving the Holocaust. And she described like two different camps that survived the Holocaust: people that survived the Holocaust and people who got back, who came back to life after the Holocaust. And it was like the state of surviving versus being alive were two different things that she differentiating. And so what you're talking about is the connection through life of our children and our family, the connection of our brotherhood. Like for me, that's the aliveness, that's the richness of life. The survival is a means to that feeling of being alive, and they're not equal things. And so it's like that differentiation between surviving and being alive, and like life is an opportunity to be alive, and it's not a guarantee. So
that's
it's a great place to. I think that's a great place to transition to the next card.
Unless someone has an important. You good?
Yeah.
All right.
What do you love about yourself that you worry others will struggle to accept? Larry. Larry's turning bright red and gushing.
You know, it's funny because I've gotten super comfortable in my awkwardness, in a sense. You know, it's like I'm very hyper aware of the fact that like I'm kind of just an awkward dude, and it was something that I think I was challenged with, you know, growing up. You know, maybe sometimes the way I process the world, and I had not the best ability to translate thought into word. It's always been something I've struggled with. But now, as I've like kind of fallen into my own being and understand like who I am, that like part of me never really shed. You know, there's always a part of me I'm like, oh well, if I just get better with language, like I'll be less awkward. And the reality is like, no, that is just a part of my like energetic signature. But I'm also aware of the fact that at times like it can be off-putting, you know, because like people like groundedness and calm, and I don't necessarily always embody that. I appreciate people who embody that. This group of men here actually do a good job of embodying that, which helps me kind of find my own calm, groundedness, and healthy expression of that type of awkwardness. But yeah, that's, you know, that is an element of myself that I've learned to love. I spent a lot of my life not loving, and now, you know, I've realized it's a lot easier in a group of people who are open and aware. Even more challenging when you go back to, you know, the if you want to call it the matrix, you know, the normal way of life. But I found that it opens doors to allow other people's awkwardness to come out. It's almost like an invitation. So it's like, oh, okay, well, this guy's a little weird, so it's okay. I can move a bit weird and be awkward too.
Let that freak flag fly.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's something that's been repressed for a long time. And as I've like stepped into it more, I've realized it is an invitation. And I have the most interesting moments, you know, if I'm like, I won't get into stories, but you know, it has become an invitation.
I appreciate that.
I would love a story, but maybe that's for post podcast.
Maybe
I want to dive into that more. Yeah, I think for me, something that I'm continually discovering is there's certain things that present themselves to me in life that I know I want to do, and I don't care what anybody else says about them. I'm going to do them. And I feel like I have developed or innately have this gift to be able to listen to that voice inside of me that says, oh yeah, this is a terrible idea. We should do it. Like, I know this is going to piss off my mom and my dad, or I know this is, you know, my friends aren't going to see it this way, or I know that this is, you know, it's going to have a hard time, you know, for some people are going to have a hard time with their ability to digest this. And yet it feels so right and so true that when it hits this like point where I'm just so self-assured in that moment. And I don't feel like I spend my life in that space. I'm learning to listen to that call more and more and address those things, and stepping into my truth as one of the most important things. We talked about it last night, as my truth from a space of love and compassion, not like, fuck you world, I'm doing this, I don't care, but kind of like, fuck you, I'm doing this, fuck you with love. But I am doing this thing because it feels right for me, and it feels true. Fuck you with love, Hager.
Make sure there's a comma there, because if you just say fuck you
Fuck
with
you,
love,
yeah.
fuck you with love without the comma.
That was a great album.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely.
If there's one that I think is really important for me to say that we're on the cusp of, it has legal implications currently in the dialogue that for me, I owe a great deal of thanks to plant medicines, psychedelics. And I love that the system that I had such difficulty breaking through to feel again and resolve a lot of the parts of myself that was creating a repressive, hurt life with pain that I was carrying forward. These medicines that have been villainized and put out to be something a lot more dangerous than they truly are, were truly my liberators. And it's not that they solved me, but they created avenues for me to reclaim connection with myself. And I love, and I can remember touching moments that especially you share with individuals that brought me back to life in a way that it destroys me thinking how many people around the world still carry the lack of access to something that within 4 to 6 hours can open them back up to life. And it's terrifying for me to say that, because I know that being in the role of a healthcare practitioner in Canada for now, speaking, admitting that I have done psychedelics, mushrooms, molecules like DMT, plants like ayahuasca, makes my heart flutter right now, thinking that there's a governing body that says what you're doing is horrible, like is wrong and illegal. When if anyone who even considers that, if you were to sit with these medicines, you would see what liberation is available, not just for yourself, but for the entire country that you're representing. And it terrifies me to say this, but I feel like it's a necessity for us to all consider that, like, our world is hurting because we don't have access to some things, and we're thinking through so much of life. But these plants, which go not where you want to go, but where you need to go, open us back up to softening the mind and back into the heart. And that's what the world needs.
We're also victims of generations of fear. And I mean, look at what they did to Ram Dass, for example, right? Like opening it up scares the masses. It reminds me of this Sturgill Simpson song, and he has some words in Turtles All the Way Down that says, some say you might go crazy, but then again, you might make you go sane.
Yeah, dude. If you think about how much of us carry coping mechanisms throughout the day, is there not a sense of insanity that we carry that when there are the opportunities to soften that in such an effective way? Of course, doing it in a very respectful, intentional way. A lot of these men here can be your guides on what doing it in working with these type of medicines in a way that has you prepare, process, experience, and integrate it in an effective way that has safety throughout. Of course, nothing is guaranteed, but there is a high likelihood that an individual comes softer, with greater presence, more ability to love, and to be of service to this world. And that's, again, what's necessary. Until then, mental health suffers, the individual life experience suffers, and then the earth, the world, future generations as a whole suffer as well.
And we can get past the generations of programming, the generations of what we're supposed to be. Within just a couple of hours, we can break down boundaries that have been created,
I think it's important to drop the Krishnamurti quote right now, which is, "It's no measure of wellness to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." And it's no measure of wellness to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And that's what we're talking about right now. And everybody wants to fit in for survival reasons, right? Survival instincts. But it's going to take people stepping away from that norm and demonstrating what's possible at the potential risk of their own persecution in order to liberate others, right? And we actually have a great collection of way showers here who have boldly stepped into the non-conventional to live in our own authenticity and to go through our own process of liberation. And I think that's where it starts. And these different plant medicines or sacraments, depending on the context, and I think the context is really important, show us the way to that deeper connection to self, others, and nature, right? In that expansiveness and that recognition of connection that is telling of the human experience is what's going to move us forward.
But I also think that we could speak to it with a little bit more excitement, right? Because we are in a psychedelic renaissance. We can't deny that. Like, things are shifting, things are changing, the consciousness is changing. It's, in the States is going legal from city to city, and people are waking up. The data is there. The Johns Hopkins data is there. Like, we are coming into a place in this world where that is going to be the norm, hopefully. And if we can continue to push this message, like, maybe one day we are treating depression with psilocybin. Maybe one day we are treating MDMA for soldiers or PTSD with MDMA for soldiers that are coming home from war, and not just throwing them into a psych ward or leaving them out, to commit suicide.
Apparently Australia just legalized yesterday as well, right? So for MDMA and I believe and psilocybin.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
I think it's really important here again, though, to come back to context. Like, if these plant medicines, which they are, become whitewashed or colonized by the models that exist or the structures and organizations that exist, then we're actually doing a disservice, right? So if we take the spirit out of spirit medicine, then we're missing the mark. Right? Because then it just becomes another sedative, like all the other things that we rely upon, like alcohol and tobacco. And the most relevant example is cannabis. And so cannabis is like a powerful plant medicine that has a spirit that is a teacher. And traditionally it was used in ceremony. And we don't apply it that way anymore. And so people are just smoking it as another method of escape, opting out rather than opting in. Right? And if we were to do that in a ceremonial context, it would open us up to the magic of this human experience, right? Rather than dulling the magic of the human experience.
Makes me wonder if the government really did an inventory of what it wanted to have its population experience. Was it withering and coping in the name of consumerism and capitalism in some way, or is it a connection to life, felt, healed, where the mental health burden if it is softened? Because right now, in the name of a dollar, if they were thinking, it would actually be net beneficial to alleviate the burden on the individuals who eventually will seek services. Mm-hmm. And if we have things that are natural, that invites people back to their own nature, that what a gift, because the spirit that is longing to reconnect with us is being pacified with the majority of molecules that are currently legal.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't think the government is that intentional in their thought process.
Well, we can invite them into, because government is entity, but government is an entity that's ran by individuals. And if the individuals think as an individual rather than the entity, they reconnect to having a relational consideration for the people that they're representing, because that's what their role is in the first place.
Yeah, and I unfortunately don't have much hope in the people at the top that are calling the shots. So I don't think it's going to be like a top-down movement. I think it's going to be a bottom-up movement.
Right, but we're a bunch of men under 50 that are leading away.
Yeah,
and in 20 years, we could be in positions of power that create and shift change. And so as we, as the scale grows, right, and as the web weaves wider, the years that we progress forward, we're going to have more control to actually implement this change.
Right. And so the desire, aspiration for power might actually be counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve, because we're kind of looking for lateral leadership rather than centralization. And so what that brings us to is each leading the way within our own community, and kind of something I was speaking about last night is creating a community that has a culture, because we lack culture. So creating our own culture, what do we want that to look like, and what can we pass on to the next generation so that culture continues to propagate in a way that creates equity and sustainability and meaning.
Yeah. Hey, if a lot of people are having challenges with the governing bodies that currently are the ones who make the biggest decisions for the world that we live in, rather than, I want to say, we can go create a new community and try and set up all this stuff, but I feel that we can change it here. Make a 20-year commitment to going into government yourself, and consider going all the way through and upholding the integrity and the philosophies that you have, and where you find barriers through your governmental process of rising to the illusion of top. That could be a massive precedent that we consider. It's just a lot of probably the people that are beating the biggest drum are wanting to stay as the pawn in the chess, that you want to stay at the front, where you have to be the rook, you have to be the queen, and maybe eventually you become the queen and the king in a way that you can truly make that decision, because that's still how the hierarchy of decisions are made. And I feel that government can be reclaimed when the soul of the individual is what's represented through this bigger entity again. And then molecules like this are reconsidered for the efficacy that it can have in this world.
But we're also shifting. We're in a place where we're shifting religious dynamics, right? And we're feeling the rise of spirituality, and we're feeling the Catholic Church is coming out of prevalence, right? All of these religious aspects are shifting, right? And more so than ever, men and women aged, 19 to 35 are searching for something, right? They're searching for something to connect to. And within the spirituality component, I think that there is a big part that is plant medicine driven. So as I think the younger generation starts to move forward with their spirituality teachings, this work is going to come hand in hand. The data is telling us that. Jamie Wheel talks about that in his opening to Recapture the Rapture, about how this rise of spirituality is going to hopefully, shift collective consciousness, right? That's the goal. If we can shift collective consciousness to open people's mind to using, and I say sustainable plant medicine, I think that we're really in a good place to facilitate this change, where I'm very optimistic that this is going to happen, and trying to lead in my own community with love. If we all embrace that concept, I think it becomes very contagious.
It's cool, Eric. You said a lot of stuff. What I just wanted to say, where it's acting small but thinking long term, right? Like so often we want the change right now, but it's happening, right? Like the wave starts from below the surface, right? So it's like it is happening. This younger generation, guys like us, we do want this, and it's ironically or not ironically, it was after my own mushroom ceremony that I realized my way to provide to the political spectrum is to start local, because those are the people that inevitably are going to want to be the congressman or the MP here, right? So that's the long game, is like, can I support someone that I feel is open and curious and here for the people at this level, and then they can rise up from there, rather than trying to pick between the two, I don't want to say puppets, but the two people that were just sort of left to choose with at the top, right? And we still have to make that choice too. But yeah, I always try to think a little bit more in what can I just do right now, rather than think about shifting the whole thing at once. So that's why I like what you're saying, Eric, about it's happening.
And I can't wait for one elected official, and it could be in any form of government, to not run away from the question, right? Like, I think we're all familiar with, like, have you done drugs? Only once, but didn't inhale, right? Now, when's that elected leader going to step up and be like, hey, actually, I healed some ancestral trauma with a deep ayahuasca journey that I went to the jungle to do, and it actually made me a better person? And like, how are we going to argue that?
You hear what Graham Hancock says about that?
No.
He's like, any president of the United States should have to go through 12 ayahuasca ceremonies to even be considered.
Absolutely.
And again, that's a long-term game, right? Someone who's just done some work and asked some questions.
Yeah, dude.
But all we're calling out, and if any of you aspiring politicians are listening, please just admit that you have healed some really amazing shit with the plants, and then go on to go be a governor.
Hey, dude, maybe there's deep pain in knowing that the leadership roles that we have right now are voted rather than rites of passage that have you going up. And that may create an inauthenticity to the person who goes to the next step and recognizes long ago that they had to subscribe to a game rather than the game of life. And that pain may be so difficult that by the time they get there, they're so terrified of being ostracized if they are to consider that game of life once again. And that's probably what the consensus agreement is with most people who are in places of decision-making roles. But if we were to look at indigenous type communities, the leaders are people who have gone through the rites of passage that they are now representing to a greater degree. And so they have the continuity of consideration that the decision that I make now, or the decision that I don't make, the things that I say or the things that I don't say, I know what that can feel like to a greater degree. And that relational capacity has them make decisions that are governing and like connected. Because right now there's governing that is highly disconnected. And you have very few that shake their heads in agreement, and a lot more that tolerate and have to adapt as a consequence to it. JP Morgan Chase, back in the day, he used to have kids from really young ages that were being vetted to where they were going to, and I think Napoleon Hill even talks about it in some sense, that they were bringing kids up to be put into positions of CEO roles and like high board of director roles in different companies to maintain the security of the industry that the Morgan Chases and all those individuals would be able to maintain power. But again, we are having a renaissance of even what power is, and the people who are in positions of power are reconsidering the impact that they're having, because it's starting to become almost unavoidable unless you soften yourself completely to recognize the implications of decisions that are out of integrity.
It's like the World Economic Forum and the young global leaders. I mean, I think we're all pretty attuned to this, of what's happening in the world right now. This isn't like some facade. It's like actually happening, right? You guys are all well aware of this, right? What's that?
In broad daylight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, essentially, does anyone want to speak to this probably better than I can, And again, I don't want to go too deep down that tangent, but that might be a big one.
What was the initial card?
What is the thing that you
card was, what do you love about yourself that you worry others struggle to accept?
You took this into the psychedelic conversation.
What is your favorite
We got
color?
to government psychedelics.
Yeah.
But psychedelics is such a great example of something that, like, I struggle with expressing self-work and my love for psychedelics in quote unquote like 3D conversations, right? I don't know how I'm going to be perceived at this stage of like my own development. Like I could care less. This worked for me, and I actually hope that something resonates with you, but it really still is shamed and looked down upon, and like it's changing as we're progressing. But this is that is a really good example of this card.
Shit, I mean, sometimes that conversation is even about breath work. Like,
Yeah, sure.
You sit around and breathe for 45 minutes?
Sure.
Holy hell, man.
And that will bring us to the next card. Does anybody have any objections?
Real quick, Stan Groff, like when he,
Dude, really?
What? That was a collective release for all of us.
That was for all of you, not me.
all right. That burp was a collective burp. Stan
Groff.
Groff, when acid was no longer available, he sought out psychedelic experiences and came upon the holotropic breathwork, right? And we can. Psychedelia is available everywhere, but there's some molecules that help in unique ways, and that was the whole topic of this for reconsideration. Anyway, yeah, let's go to the next card. And what I'd probably invite is if you have to burp, either before or after a share, like in between a share, so I can edit it. If it's all welcome, like,
all parts welcome. No bad.
Oh, okay, rip ass.
No bad parts.
That was
That's just
pathetic.
like both mics are in.
Do you tell all your guests that?
Oh, you can fart, but you can't burp. No, joke.
Everyone's first time on a podcast?
Oh, Christian Pavel, I think that's his name, right? He reminded me because he farted so loudly in Austin when we were at a restaurant, and I'm like, dude, what was that? He said, look, I'm at a point right now in my life that everything that is natural within me, I'm going to embrace. And I'm just going to do. And so I could picture him walking through the airport just farting and continuing on, and the whole world looking around. Then I realized, because I was at the hospital, I'm like, my fart is other people's problem, if it's truly a problem in the first place. So it just laughed, and it's a reminder. Embrace your nature.
Shout out.
Burp if you must.
Shout out to Christian. He just got put out there for the whole world on that one. I got this one buddy who just farts anytime he pleases.
Sorry, bud.
Sorry, not sorry.
He's great with teeth.
Thinking about you.
Moving on from flatulations.
From flatulence to excellence.
Literally, from flatulence to excellence. What do you think you'll regret not doing when you're on your deathbed?
Making a podcast that's not called Flatulence to Excellence.
Welcome, Rise.
I think my regret would be like truly not living. And when I was faced with like my near-death experience, just a year ago, there was really a moment of like, I haven't done enough. I haven't truly lived like my truth and my purpose to my fullest potential. And so if for some reason, and I don't think that's going to happen, but if for some reason I'm on that deathbed and I haven't lived up to my purpose and I haven't lived fully and really been present, then I will have regrets on my deathbed. But as I was talking about yesterday, that this conversation around like the deathbed and death and that transition has been a really big piece of the last year of development for me.
For context, where were you?
When I had that, I was in the hospital. I was in the ICU with COVID pneumonia, with 3 pulmonary embolisms in one lung and 2 in the other, I think. So I was in, a tough place of not really kind of knowing the direction that my body was going to take, but having control in where my mind was going. And so when I took over control and got out of fear and into love, things for me started to shift. And so that's where the really dialing into love as a frequency for life has created this shift that is allowing me to lead with love and lead this life with love. And if I continue this, then I'm going to show up at that deathbed with no regrets, like Hoka, hey, today is a good day to die. But it's really about for me living fully and presently.
I'll jump in on that. It's a tough act to follow with the near-death experience, and thankfully it wasn't that day, as you said. I think my regret would be not living with enough love, connecting that to every person in my immediate household with my wife and my kids, extending that to my family and this beautiful brotherhood that we have here, this tribe of people, and really the spot that I'm trying to get to is like pushing that out to like everybody, right? So just like walking in to get a coffee or the supermarket or running an errand, whatever it is, to like push out that love, that heart coherence that we hear about, that ability to just make someone's day just by your presence, with a smile, with a nice note, a gesture, a wink, I see you, with nothing more than just love in it. Not like, I see you, girl, like, but like, I see you. And, you know, even when we talked about the most important thing and he was talking about his uncle, like that resonated, like how much I want to live inside of that embodiment, and how called to that and how easy it feels sometimes. And then how on other days I'm like, where is that? Where was that guy? He was here yesterday, or he was here an hour ago. Like what? And I think it's, you know, like there's this Abe Lincoln quote. He said, you know, most people are as happy as they make up their minds to be. Like I think most people can choose as much love as they choose to make up their minds to have inside of their body, to exude that, you know, in every single day, and meet things with love. Meet anger with love, meet love with love, meet sadness with love, and really breathe that into your existence, and most importantly, breathe it out to everybody that's around you.
So my words, but better.
Yeah, along those lines, what we've spoken about in many instances is that spectrum of the human experience that we allow and then don't allow, and the capacity, which is pretty brilliant, that it's wired within us to not be present and carry on an entire life. But we've tasted what presence feels like. We've tasted moments of like orgasmic presence, just in the presence of someone else, without intimacy necessarily, but that moment is intimate. Yearning for that, but also allowing the spectrum of where that question comes up that one day where like, where the fuck is my presence? If we even have the capacity to ask it, because very often we're just immersed in it. A disconnected day, not embodied, completely hijacked. What a beautiful spectrum that we get to exist in and then come back to. And then oscillate within with, I guess, the least amount of resistance, acknowledging that parts of us will control and then others don't. Because, I mean, I do see in the ER that the regrets of the person who held grudges, blocked moments of connection with someone else or themselves, that now they yearn for that moment, especially when time ends up being the currency that they forgot was the most important one to life, that they end up reconsidering. And if they're not completely hijacked into regretting, they can finally sink into a moment that has been waiting for them for a long period. That moment of connection, not just to others, but to their life and the essence of it, at least for a temporary moment. And I can look back frustrated at times that I like regrettably subscribed to things that distracted, that burdened me, and that some life circumstances had me unavailable to some parts of where I would have loved to experience. You know, I remember I was working 108 hours a week during residency at times, and I flew to Iceland, and I got there with my cousin in 2016. We get to the top of this, we landed, overnight flight, went straight to this waterfall called Gleamer, and I was at the top of Gleamer, and it was the most beautiful sight that vision was registering, but no sense was actually connected to the majesty of it. And I checked in with my body, and senses were absent. There was a canvas of the most astonishing with no part of me actually present to it. And I made a promise to myself that when I went back there again, I would have greater presence. But I don't have to go. Why did I have to go to the top of that spot to be reminded of this? Because I could have been doing it while I was at a coffee shop, meeting a human being. But sorry?
It gave you the reminder, though.
Yeah, and now I'm reminded of the simplicities of it. Like, an exercise that really woke me back up between then was, I read somewhere, go sit with a blade of grass and don't get up until you've connected to it again. And it was such a stupid thought. But then when you sat and you saw the majesty of it, the colors lit up. You felt that you saw it just like moving. And these, where we find mundane simplicity, actually invited us back to the majesty of life. And then that ends up transpiring in an exponential way to all other facets of life. And what I feel embodying was greater presence, which I regret less, which I still get frustrated from, but I'm more available to the oscillation that I feel you experiencing. And I feel will be an inevitability, and honestly something I'm terrified of the day that I want to connect with my child and I'm not able to. But I will think of you, and I'll think of that question and the spectrum that I give myself permission to be more momentous and AWE, full. And on the days that are awful, accept them as part of the spectrum a little bit as well too.
I really appreciate actually what you're all saying, and as I hear is like that presence, is fundamentally important, because it's like you're not taking anything with you out of this life, but how many moments were you actually present to look a friend in the eye and be like, we're here right now. It's fucking cool. What else is like really, as you speak, I'm being present to is, how much contrast is necessary to bring us back to the presence, being confronted with our mortality. An experience this summer where, having to try doing CPR on a neighbor really brought me to that, because the next day, we weren't able to save him. And he was my age, he had kids. And the next day I found myself on a dock, and there was just a little bit of humidity in the air that just triggered seeing him and working on him. And, I felt very aware in that moment. I had two paths to kind of go down, as I could fall into this fear and this desperation around that experience. And I look down and my fiance's playing in the water and my 3 kids are all in the water, or I could just be present to this moment, which is what is real and in front of me. And, it's interesting is that, being up on the mountain and the contrast of having beauty in front of you and not connecting to it is what brought you to the presence. Right. And so it's like, sometimes those really terrible experiences in life is the contrast we need to be present. And, that's just kind of what I was hearing in the conversation. So, yeah.
I guess.
Vision's getting a little wavy.
Next question. Yeah, we're really on one. I like the second part.
We'll cut the first one.
Oh boy. What lie did your parents tell you because they thought it was in your best interest? Drugs are bad.
Back to that.
Nancy Reagan.
For me, the biggest one was that like pain was avoidable. And I kind of grew up like avoiding injury, because like as an athlete, it was like, don't get injured, you won't be able to play your sport. And so this idea of like being protected from pain, being protected from injury, instead of teaching me how to heal when the pain did arise. And that was something that was an incredible thing to learn, and that I continue to try to learn more about, is like, okay, pain is unavoidable. So how do we learn how to heal it and have that as a skill in our toolkit, you know? So for me, in a nutshell, it's that, yeah, pain is not avoidable, and you're strong enough to heal from it.
Mm-hmm. For me, it was that different people have different value. My mom hates when I bring this up, but there was a garbage man that was picking up the garbage, and I hadn't done my homework yet that day. And she said, if you don't do your homework, you're going to turn out like him. And I looked at him, and I'm like, he seems like a great guy. He smiles every time. He's the same one that comes every week. And where I felt the lesson, I still got the lesson that people have different values. I felt that there was something within me that still felt that there was a thread of value that existed in every single human being, irrespective of what they did. And I could have gone down a route of like despising that person because the value was less than what my parents were subscribing to. And I love them deeply for it. And I know she did not mean harm by that. And she was speaking encouragingly. But I think that that was one of the things that I saw. And even though I was like 8 or 9, I still caught it.
It's funny because one of the indicators that I always use in my mind is if I'm feeling myself too much, if that ego gets too big, I feel like that's a big indicator that we've lost the path. You know, and I think everyone at times needs to check in with themselves. And if you feel a little bit too much of self-importance and you look at that garbage man and you fancy yourself better, then you've lost your way to some degree. Because in the end, the reality is that garbage man just had different opportunities, a different story. Maybe he actually loves what he does, and that's okay. But then we begin to judge, and then we project our own ego upon other people. And I think that's a lot of like when we talk about the systemic failures and everything that we're talking about with governance and everything, is that it's a lot of ego that's created this reality that's failing, you know. And if we could just get back to that self-awareness and realize that we are all equals in this existence, not one person special. If you can just tap into that, I feel like that's where all of a sudden life kind of settles and everything gets to a point of stasis, and then a little bit of calm prevails, at least for a moment, until we start fancying ourselves again. And then you say, no.
Is there something underneath this layer right now? Because like I feel some emotions.
No, I think it's a governing belief in my life, just because I've kind of lived the spectrum of, you know, like not having and being now on the other side of, you know, a lot of things are going well in my life, and being able to, you know, feel into years of my life, like, you know, bussing tables, waiting tables, bartending, and knowing what it's like to have utilities shut off. I've been able to have a real felt experience, you know, in that experience of not having. That now on the other side of the coin is like, I see that my life could have went in 10,000 different divergent directions, but in the end, that when I see that garbage man or any person, like I see a mirror of myself and a mirror into a potentiality that could be my own. And then I think it's, you know, just up to us not to judge that person. Because the funny thing is, you know, the people I know that are doing quite well on like a societal standard are the ones that do have a lot of deep sadness. And, you know, we hold them to high regard because we share this like construct of what we value as a society. And the funny thing is, you know, I've learned that there's the people that are the most special to me don't really fit that societal mold of success. And they're the people I love the most because they've figured out the things that I haven't figured out. And it's, and that's the other beauty of life is knowing that like there is things to learn. So when we talk about these micro moments that you have with people, it's not to make somebody else feel good. It's to also know that there's things to be extracted. You know, there's knowledge to be extracted from everyone, even children. You know, we look down upon them. But even children, there's knowledge and things that we can gain from just tapping into those experiences. But it starts with knowing that that person is no better than yourself, and vice versa.
Yeah, dude, what you were saying, like, because that whole thread is really important. Like, catching when we are judging, judgment, shame is the internalized voice of others, and it can be the voice of the society that you exist among, that would be speaking for something that may be coming hard down on someone. And where you were saying for the individual to check into that part when it does come up, it's really empowering to yourself to reclaim that. Sometimes spending time seeing where the voice came from, whose it was before, tuning into that, reclaiming it, recognizing the differentiation that voice that now you repeat is not actually yours in the first place, and then reorienting it into one that is more considerate and maybe in line with where you'd want to be, maybe not necessarily where you are. And that's something that we reclaim over time, because all of us have been told that life is to be a particular way and experience a particular way, and reclaiming that where there's greater consideration for others is devoid of barriers, when the judgment and the shame that are really well-intended psychological constructs are set aside and we see again.
Yeah, I think on that note, our parents are trying to tell us about the world that they grew up in, rather than allowing us the opportunity to create the world we want to grow up in. And so my lie was that strangers are bad, or you have to keep an eye on them, or, be careful. And Joe and I were talking as an expected father to a father, and one of the things that came up for me was realizing that strange energies is what I want to teach my kids about, not strange people or strangers. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to really dive into that when something doesn't feel right, teaching your kids, teaching ourselves, but if we have kids, teaching our kids to listen to that energetic frequency that they all have that says something's not right with this person, or something's off. And when we started to dive into it a little bit, just on the break, I spent a lot of time talking to my kids about energy and how they know how people feel without seeing them or talking to them or them saying a word. And we kind of got into it, and I was telling them how I demonstrated it, because they're 6 and 7, they don't really get it yet. They understand the words, but they don't know how to articulate that back or what the experience is. So I created an experience, and they were both in the bathtub, and I walked out in the hallway, and I said, "Tell me what Daddy's energy is telling you." And when I get mad, I stomp around. So I just stomped through the hall, and I waited by the door for a second, and I popped my head around, and both my kids were like, and I was like, "Are we in trouble? What's going on?" I'm like, "Well, what are you feeling? You just asked a great question. What do you think, my mindset is? Where do you think I'm at?" Like, "You're angry or you're frustrated?" "Yes." "So did I tell you that I was angry?" "No." "Did I tell you that I was frustrated?" "No, but we know those steps. We could feel it." "All right, great." "Yeah, but that's easy. It's anger." "All right." Walked outside. I just started singing a song and dancing a little bit. Couldn't see me, right? I walk in, they're dancing in the bathtub already. "Where are we at?" "We're happy. This is happy, Dad." Like, great. So simple. But the ability to get ourselves to connect to that energy and to say, "You already know this. Here are the words behind it. You know what it feels like." Now you can articulate it. Now you can share it with your friends. You know when somebody is talking to you, if it feels right. How many times we talk to our friends, and we know this as adults, and especially in this group, we're all pretty tapped in. "How's everything?" Right? Most of us in here are going to tell it like it is, not fine, right? Or if we get a fine, it's, "Come on, bro. I know that your words aren't matching your energy right now." And I've got the time, because I didn't ask that question to get a fine. I'm not being polite. I don't care about the weather, even though it's fucking minus 40 out here, right? Like, I'll talk about that for a minute. What I really care about is the people who are around me and their energies and what they're saying to me. What I want to pass on is something that they already know that we've been denied most of our lives, of saying that you can't trust that instinct, or everyone's bad, or it's only family, it's only friends. Well, now you're limiting these beautiful interactions with amazing strangers, and this opportunity to learn and grow from cultures that aren't your own, that are different households and different values. And that is a very worldly view for a child to have who doesn't travel, or maybe doesn't have the ability to travel, and yet because they've connected with, you know, a Lebanese boy at their school, and they're like, they eat different shit, what's going on? Like, I love that story, right? I love that value, because the energy is the same, where they've grown up is different, and they're getting exposed to that. So I want to step into where we absorb other people's, or acknowledge and absorb those energies, and we are recognizing strange energies and not people as strange. And when we identify that, we resonate a truth in our body that we all in this room, when we hear things that are true, we all vibrate. We all know what truth feels like. And when we hear a lie, or something that's not true, or maybe not even true for us, because truth is, you know, perceptual, right? That's the duality of it. It's like, the analogy that I've been given is like a coral reef when a predator swims by, right? Like, everything is kind of like sucks in and becomes rigid. We've all felt that rigidity of, okay, I'm going to be careful where I go here, or I'm going to keep an eye on that person. Strange energies is what we should be talking about, or when things take that turn, is, yeah, something beautiful to that.
Yeah. Yeah, dude.
You guys both know
That was
the lyrics,
beautiful.
right?
Yeah. I mean,
Speaking of strange energies, Kave Kavusi.
oh, dude, what he says is like so on point. Like that stranger apprehension that we're discussing here versus strange behavior acknowledgement. When we can't differentiate that, you just learn, I'm going to eliminate a person or cancel them or devalue them in some way that creates a massive division and separation. That's what society does. Like,
That's what's happening.
yeah, dude, you walk around, we were talking about this yesterday, that you walk on the street and you'll maybe acknowledge a person and then almost acknowledge their non-existence as you walk by. But a part of you has asserted that this person's not going to kill me or suddenly go crazy, stab me in the neck with a knife, at least hopefully. And if they do, you may actually change sides because you've gauged them in some way. But the behavior, the quality that has you check in on if there's an energy signature with the person that's walking by you, that you're either connected or not connected with, that's a very different thing that you have as your gauge for whether to connect with or not. And when that's your consideration, everyone else is a potential friend that you can connect with as a human that's sharing life experience at the same time as you. Because all of you guys have, everyone who's alive has the same agreement, which is breath with this life until that agreement is severed, then life no longer exists. Till then, that person who's walking on the street got the majesty of life, and they're potentially waiting to have the most incredible human experience that they interact with you. And I think that's a massive reclamation, dude. And what a gift to teach the children, the differentiation of that as well too. So they're gonna say that to their friends. They're gonna, and their friends are gonna notice the embodiment, because children embody things that have been beautifully conditioned into them, and that they've caught onto both consciously and unconsciously from their parents as well too. I just want to commend how amazing and acknowledge that is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Received. Trying to.
Before the next card, I think I'm going to take a little break from the podcasting.
Oh yeah.
Feeling pretty wavy over here.
Oh yeah.
I'd like to walk away for a bit. So.
Yeah, cool.
Same.
You guys continue. I'm just
'Kay.
Breath of fresh air.
Did you take?
Right.
This is because they want, the psychedelics are having them connect. It's not because they feel unsafe.
Definitely want to hit that later.
Yeah. And I also
Did
acknowledge
everybody?
the honesty there. It's big.
Did everybody drop
Yeah.
in?
as we
Studio
close.
time is
The,
up,
cons-
really.
the podcast name is Layered Prescriptions, which is the things that you have come to experience in your life that you embody. What is the invitation that's there that people come to meet when they're in your experience? And if you were to put it to words, what is that embodiment for you? And because no human being is like a simple thing, we may say like life, you just have to this in order to that in life. It's never that. There's the layers in particular that I know exist with all of you guys. So the whole podcast being Layered Prescriptions, it's the invitation through embodiment of what you have.
I have, and I would love to, because of the name of the podcast and because of kind of what was just talked about, here's a layered prescription about strange energies. And it's just kind of, do you want to just keep riffing here right now?
Sure.
Because you inspired me with that story, and I'm like, I got to talk to my kids about that. And then there's this other layer to it, because I'm just leaving this course. And what I get a lot in these anger management courses is strange energy. But it's, it's presented interesting. Like even today, like the strange energy of one of the men just talking about his response to a situation where someone knocked on his door. And it was so disproportionate, so angry. So, and it's very much like one of those situations where that's a strange energy. But the sharing of the story in itself was a strange energy. In a sense, it was testing the safety of what I bring in my presence. And even in that whole space, you can sense that the view the individual had brought to it, to that situation, there was something in that energy he was bringing. And my point being in this is, as potential healers, that and we're really here to support other people. We also contain strange energies at time, and how do we find in ourselves the ability to accept it because it's there, and then how do we respond to it in a compassionate way? Because in that, like, just kind of microcosm of that course, me, by not presenting resistance to what he was bringing and just was listening to it and was actually encouraging to create understanding, created a situation where his whole energy shifted by the end of the course. He was a very safe and active participant from a posturing participant. And so, just as I verbally process this out, is kind of thinking of, how do we make sense of strange energies in ourselves? And when we're a service of people, how do we respond to the strange energy without closing, but compassion?
That's a great awareness. And as you say that, I acknowledge that there are no women here today. And women have a different frequency of the world that they're gauging to say if it's safe or not. And in that line, I mean, I remember in Sedona, I asked the women if any of them, like, how do they leave their house? And a lot of them claimed that they would wear a headphone with a hoodie, not make any eye contact because the world wasn't safe. And their cues, then we asked all the women that were there at that time, how many of you have experienced this with a healthcare professional or in the world? Every single one of their hands went up. When we asked the men that were there at that time, none of them almost put their hands up, except for when they had someone of the same sex make them feel uncomfortable. Was the only place that they found relatability with, where the women felt a strange behavior. But women were almost not saying that it's strange. It was their nervous system was so primed for a high level of sensitivity, for a low threshold to feel that something is strange. And so the onus is on a world almost to be one that is more safe and welcoming for the individuals to put down their guards and their shields for their own sense of something being strange. First, not being misconstrued, but more importantly, being sharp and attuned to what is actually in line and out of line.
Yeah, I want to just co-sign on that and say that that very conversation about strange behaviors was prompted by my wife, who sent me a video clip on, I don't know if it was IG or TikTok or whatever it was, and this woman identified the strange behaviors versus strangers, and I know my wife is well okay with me sharing this, but that was really important to her because she was molested as a child by her stepfather inside of a house where we all expect safety. We all expect our hearts to be protected. we don't expect that that's going to happen right inside the house. And yet everyone talks about stranger danger, and the marker is close to 90% that those kinds of traumas happen from close friends and family or a relative.
Yeah.
And so the difference between identifying those strange energies versus strangers is a real salient point, I think, for a lot of women, especially who go through their lives in the way that you're talking about, where they always feel like, I mean, Dave Chappelle has a great thing about it where he talked about getting paid $10,000 one day and walking through Harlem, and he's like, this is what it feels like to be a woman. Like, I've got this thing that I know everybody wants. And like, if they find out I got this bag of cash, like, it's over for me. And anytime they could take it from me, right? Like, he's like, that's the closest thing that I'll ever get to being able to assess that, you know, as a woman. Like, I could only imagine that that's the proximity of the threat level and the danger that they walk through. So as you're saying that, like, yeah, that's a great thing to have a laugh about. And yet there's so much truth to that, that I think it needs to be honored. We need to talk about that. And there's a group of men here who are coming together to do work and look for ways to support each other. It's also, how do we support the feminine, right? How do we make them feel safe and seen and heard and protected? And if we're not spending a little time talking about that, we're doing a disservice to our partners, our mothers, our sisters, our daughters, all these people who have gone through their lives feeling that threat level, that taxation on their energetic bodies. And that's exhausting.
It just reminds me of the question that was asked before, which is, what's that lie? And that was one of the things we were talking about in the course, is junk values. And what might propagate a lot of the strange energy or that threatening energy is, you know, junk values, these values in society that we say are important, but actually don't actually, it's like junk food. It might taste good, but at the end of the day, it leaves you feeling sick, you know, and stuff like your image, your Instagram following, the money you make, the job, you know, these things. And it makes me, you know, wonder, just like exactly that. Does that produce a lot of the strange energy that you're talking about, and being that healthy masculine is reconnecting to what are the values that are really, really important, that create safety, that create integrity, that nourish, right? Rather than the junk food that makes you ill at the end. I really love the concept. Yeah.
It's funny, this came up to me earlier, and it was actually coming out of another journey, and I had this vision of being a teenage boy and what the music and the videos and things I was watching was doing to me, which was then what was that doing to the girls in my class, which is then it's this whole feeder system of what does a girl have to be, and then therefore what do they have to put up with. And it's kind of scary, man. It's like, whoa, okay, that's how we've gotten here. And it's not to like push or repress certain aspects of a young male, but it's to be conscious, to try to, again, pivot in our own little way to be more conscious of how we're treating women, right? And yeah, it was a really interesting, it almost showed me the whole spiral of how this is all happening, and just Kaveh bringing that up on the street, or it's just, it sucks, man. That kind of like scares me to think of how girls and women have to go out in the world because we haven't maybe like taken the steps ourselves to question how each individual person should be treated, male or female. And I guess it's not just women, it's really any minority at this point, really, right? But yeah.
You know, we talk about nutritional mismatch that can happen with a sweet meal that doesn't have the nutrients that are actually there, on a guidance for the energy signature. If there's a human that has a mismatch with what they're representing and the energy that we're feeling, there's a gut feeling, an intuitive sensation that's there, and a tendency for a lot of us to have become estranged and unfamiliar to being connected to that feeling, how it expresses itself in that moment from what we experienced long ago. I mean, for a lot of individuals who, you're right, 1 in 3, and it's probably more, have been abused in their own home by someone that they loved, trusted, was not by choice, but by the circumstance asking them to protect them. And they felt an aspect of them violated long ago, dysregulated a lot of their capacity to feel safe, to be here within themselves in that moment. I can only imagine what sensors then scan to say, hey, the rest of the environment needs to be safe now. It should be. When the place where we called home for our earliest stages of establishment for who we are could not find peace within itself as well. And we have a lot of individuals who say this in the spiritual community, identify as being empaths, highly sensitive. I would argue that a lot of it stems from a nervous system that was dysregulated to say the world is not safe and so I must scan. And that sensitivity is yearning to put that shield down and just be in trust gracefully with the world that we're in.
Yeah.
But till then, you know, that person who's exhibiting the strange behavior out of integrity, in integrity, whatever it is, that may be how they're coping with the world, with how they were hurt at some point. Keep thinking that human beings are not born shitty. We just show up that way. And a lot of it is...
Great bumper sticker right there. That's at the meditation supply store.
Tell Dave. Yeah, it's one. Some is by circumstance, and others is by just what was conditioned over time. So that strange behavior, I think acknowledgement is a really big one. And the way that we have the greatest shift in the world by us is us first considering what our detector is and also maybe what we're emitting.
Yeah.
And you can have real conversations with people who maybe you can ask them like, hey, what's the feeling you get from me? And be open to the possibility of them saying, you are a piece of shit. You are an asshole to other people. You're very nice, but it's conditional with the select amount of people.
Yeah.
And that's a person, you're pretty much out of integrity almost all the time. But are we open to explore that? That could be a very tough thing to digest, and maybe it's too real and raw, and we work towards that.
Are you talking to me?
I'm talking directly to you.
You're a piece of shit too.
That's
I
why
mean,
we're all
just like
here.
Ryan, for example, right?
It just turns to a big intervention now.
This is an intervention.
These cameras aren't even on.
Yeah, I've been mulling this over.
We were actually solely talking about you for the first 2 hours.
I've been mulling this over for a while.
Oh,
The
hey.
puns keep
Doctor Pun.
All right, new card here.
Yeah, grab a new card
Last
for
one.
sure.
Last
Got a hot
one.
hand.
The, just
I'm gonna have you cut the
That's it,
deck.
Eric's got a hot hand. No, that's what he's...
Eric knows when he looks at his Instagram that he's starting to check out.
Yeah.
Yeah. What does humanity completely misunderstand?
I think we've talked about this.
Yeah.
It's self.
Let's go to the next question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where are you playing it too safe?
I think let's hear it from everyone on this last one.
Should we do just one word?
Okay.
Let's get into 1 minute. Let's get into a minute.
No, but like there's probably one thing that we were playing it too safe on, and
well, like
don't-
I could easily say like entrepreneurism, like I can easily say that, but like the reality where I'm playing it too safe is I know I have stuff I could put out there and I could do really well at, but there's a part of me that would rather not try at the risk of failure, right? Or wouldn't want to try because my own measure of success, it won't live up to that, right? And
Apparently, though, that's the question. So entrepreneurship is your answer.
that's right. And then I can't help quantifying it.
Well, I'm not going to boil it down to one word. It's a little tricky. It's a tricky constraint. I find that this stage of my life is I've kind of found some success and things are going pretty good. And, I'm fortunate enough to lead a team of people that I deeply love. And there's times I wonder, though, if, there's comfort in that, and is there something on the other side of comfort? And I think, I do at times feel like I'm playing it small, just, leading inside of a singular Ford franchise store in New Jersey, of all places. And there's times where I feel like, am I playing a big enough role? Is my expansiveness going to meet its potential in this role? And it's something I've wrestled a lot with in the last few years specifically. And I've gotten okay with the fact that it's seemingly small, but at the same time, as I do realize that there's a lot of people who my decisions and actions and presence does impact, and then they touch a lot of other people's lives. So there is somewhat of a ripple, but I do think that at times, it can be a crutch, and I'm not really challenging myself in a sense. Big challenge would be, can I step away from what I love and immerse myself into a physical environment that is uncomfortable, and who would I be without these things that nurture my life? But I kind of like it. I kind of like living my life right now, so I'm not ready to give it up. My ego's holding on. It's holding on tight.
That's Mike.
I think this will be a good question for me to ponder further, but as per our conversation earlier, I think an area where I'm playing it too safe is not being fully open, right? So being fully open to everything means feeling everything, right? Which comes with a level of acceptance for not only all parts of myself, but all parts of the human experience, which means like all parts of humanity, right? So it's kind of a bigger spiritual meta contemplation of releasing judgment of my experience and like the collective experience, right? So as long as we are denying any aspect of it, then we're closed off to some part of it, right? So an unwillingness to feel discomfort means that we're not going to feel the full level of comfort, or an unwillingness to feel pain, we're not going to feel the full spectrum of bliss, right? So I would like to be less discerning in the full expression, if that makes sense, because I think only in that openness will my true potential come through. And really trusting that it's safe to do that is important to me.
Yeah, I think mine is going to be from that scene in the Oracle, or in the Matrix, when he's talking to the Oracle and she asks him if he's the one. And he kind of like hesitates and says he doesn't think he's the one. And she's like, I can see you're hedging your bet, right? And it doesn't mean that I think I'm the one, but it's almost like I'm not giving myself permission to be the one person that I could be. In a sense of like Neo, like, and it's the Marianne Williamson poem, like not accepting what potential greatness is within me. There's too much comfort and closure and fear, particularly around money and just being safe enough that it doesn't open me to whatever Joe actually is. And I've started recognizing that, right? And so, yeah, it's like I'm hedging my bet a little because I think life needs to be safe. And so I'm not actually, I'm being too safe as to what is Joe.
Dude, I think you guys have all touched on where I feel that as well too. As the question came up, I felt that there are feelings and experiences within kave that are currently unavailable, and the verb to kave, the life experience of kave, the adjective of kave that I know myself to be has less of a range that I live through than is actually available to me. And I taste it from time to time, and I know that it's available, but it's that element of comfort. But I think mainly it's fatigue. But the aspect of kave that I know so well is exhausted almost all of the time. And in the moments that I actually get 3-4 days of really good sleep, I almost feel like I'm manic, and it's terrifying. So I almost like blunt myself because of the expansive possibility that exists that I've made contact with from time to time. But it's the feelings that are arising, and it's very likely repressed feelings that have all of the invitation at some point to be felt through and are yearning for it. And I like cognitively knock the door, but knocking with my heart is one of the most terrifying things to open that door to, because I told myself when I had my tumor that I'll die from the feelings again, from 2009 until 2016, where I didn't really feel. And then I felt again with the help of medicines that brought feeling of life back in, and meeting my parents' eyes again and meeting my friends' eyes. During that time, I said, the next time I feel, it's going to be so overwhelming that I will die. And these medicines showed me that that's not the case, and that the feeling can be embraced, beautiful, and most importantly, safe. And I felt my mortality, and then I felt like an inexplicable expanse that arose within me again. And that place is scary to go to when you don't feel like you have the energy bandwidth to actually be with it as it's enveloping your environment and your life experience. And I feel like I got to a tipping point in 2019 where I said I choose to test that theory, and I had medicine experiences at least every 2 months, including culminating with ayahuasca, that the plants showed me that my body is a lot stronger and that every feeling is welcome, and I felt all of it that day and in those experiences. And I feel that it is much more available to me now, but I still play safe again, because I feel that the bandwidth that I have where it were to come up, which needs some time for processing, I don't have the luxury of time for, though that's an illusion.
Thank you for that answer, because it dovetails nicely into facing this fear that all of a sudden is welling up in me. I felt very comfortable sharing and even being emotional in those shares this entire time that we've been together for over 2 hours now. And yet the thing that is alive when I hear playing it safe is I'm more than happy to acknowledge that this gift that I've been given and being able to channel, and it's really easy to share with you guys inside of this community, because I feel so seen, and I know that container is safe. And yet that question on a podcast to then say to the world, like, this is a thing that I can do, this is a thing that I have access to, I'm surprised with just how terrified I am right now to say those words and to make that proclamation. I feel it in my body. I feel my heart rate going up. I feel my palms are sweaty right now. I mean, I've been fucking cool as cucumber this whole time, and this one question, this is the final question. And even when you said, like, hey, we're all going to answer this, I was like, fuck. This is the one time I was going to shut up. And so thank you for pulling that other card. Thank you for acknowledging that. Thank you for talking about stepping into those fears. And I think everything in some way, shape, or form for me has led up to facing this and being willing to say it to everybody. So,
good job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's what's alive.
Yeah.
You met the moment.
I'm gonna go shower.
It's
It was Eric.
Yeah, I don't
Said
play it
95
safe at all. I'm actually off the rails in every aspect of my life. I'm going full throttle fucking 100% of the time. No, I would say that I'm probably playing it safe with my relationship and healing my relationship with my family. I think that that's a hard thing to kind of approach as I'm doing my own inner healing. I think that there's a lot of things that I would love to bring up to my family to maybe get support that I'm avoiding because of like the further repercussions. And so I think that if I'm playing it safe anywhere, it is it's active avoidance of some of like the deeper traumas from childhood. And being aware of it and like feeling, icky. Like it feels icky talking about it is, I think, the first step of moving forward to healing it. So thanks for the space to talk about it in public.
And be icky.
Now I'll go off the rails everywhere else.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we'll just wrap this up then. I want to thank all the gentlemen that are here who said yes to coming up to the cottage after a long hiatus of being able to be physically present with one another. I really appreciate you guys all taking the time to commit, to consider, and to reflect as you shared. And I know this just scratches the surface overall on a lot of things that just temporarily the mic is capturing. I'm grateful that the paths that you guys all individually walk have so many elements of what you embody, being closer to integrity and really being in service of the world, and while being in consideration of how you can nurture yourself along the way. And I intend to practice what I'm preaching right now as well too. And I know that this is the first of many opportunities for us to be connecting this way. And the men that weren't able to make it here are deeply missed as well. And the women that are walking alongside in our lives, we honor and appreciate and respect you deeply. And part of this is an intention to have the men who do make it through this entire podcast, getting to this point, to pause and consider for a moment how they can make, in the experience of themselves being safer, an invitation for the women that walk in our vicinity, their future daughters, their cousins, the strangers who are very well intended, who are yearning to know that the world is safe and can be experienced for the short life that we all get to share together. And maybe you're listening to this long after we've all passed, but to consider this during your lifetime, that we all reorient to a world that is felt in honor, gracefully in service, and I thank you all. I love you all.
Thanks,
Love you,
brother.
brother.
Yeah.
Love
All
you
you
guys.
guys.
All you guys, yeah.
Some bastards.
I want to thank these men for taking the time to dialogue and share their thoughts, being vulnerable. It's important to have a world where men can be unconditionally witnessed in the presence of men that they trust. And this is one example of many of spaces where men get closer to their integrity and are role models that I think a lot of the generation of young men that are growing up right now are sorely missing. This conversation is one of many that, again, is an igniter for you to consider, to make spaces wherever you are in the world, whatever age you are, to have dialogues that are in greater truth, where you can support men, where they are not being judged, where they're not being shamed, where their truth is welcomed, and it has a space for it to just be witnessed. Thank you again, the men that are in my life, my father, the men that I walk alongside, my brother, my closest friends, my cousins, my fake cousins, role models that have been present in my life as well too, and those who come to be. I'm looking forward, as I progress through this beautiful life experience as well, to be a role model and someone that can be humbled with places that may be my blind spots, for me to approximate to greater integrity as well too. That's the most beautiful place to be. I love you. I want to thank my guests for taking the time to share their insights and wisdom. Please consider connecting with them, and their information will be in the show notes. Consider leaving a review and rating the podcast. I'm not going to tell you what to rate. You do as you feel. And please, before this podcast ends and you go on to the next thing, take 3 to 5 minutes in silence to allow some of the information that you heard to be contemplated, digested, and integrated. To the degree that every experience has a moment to actually have it be processed, it has a greater chance for it to be instilled into your life. I wish the rest of your day and week is beautiful. Take care, remain curious, and don't forget to play.